back to another episode of Shred's Takes. I'm joined here today by former Columbia and Amherst baseball player Jack Harlan, also a teammate of mine this past year in the basketball team at Amherst College. Great kid, great teammate, and a good baseball basketball insider. So, Jack, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on again, Shred. It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
So, it's kind of a crazy thing around the MLB. You know, the Marlins just are having a real big issue containing COVID on their team. You know, Derek Jeter came out recently and said how he blames the players for it, saying how they, quote, letting their guard down. I just want to ask you what you think of this whole situation and if it's going to, transpire to other MLB teams causing there to not be a season.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely problematic if you look at, how it kind of took off through the Marlins clubhouse, and now we're seeing the same thing with the Cardinals. They just had their 4-game series postponed this week, and it's already such a short season to, postpone these games and push them back. Doesn't seem like a great solution. And, the Marlins are supposed to start back up today, but who's to say that that'll even happen? What was it? 21 cases on the Marlins last week and 29 total in the MLB. And I think Bud Selig Manfred, Rob Manfred's the commissioner now, but Manfred has, good reason to be concerned. And, I think, if another two teams, we've already seen it spread to the Cardinals. If we see, two more teams, have a big outbreak with COVID, I think it'll be hard to carry on with the season as planned. And, I think the MLB has gone to great lengths to, try and figure out a way to make the season happen and do it in a safe way. But I think COVID cases in a system where there is no bubble like the NBA is, it's inevitable. With how this virus is spreading. And I think it's also hard to, I think a lot of the Marlins players got it reportedly by going out to a club. And the rumors right now are that a lot of Cardinals players went out to a casino after one of the games. And it's hard to tell MLB players what to do when this is how they're, accustomed to being throughout most of their careers. It's like pretty standard to go out after a game if you're an MLB player and, hit the town. And I think it's hard to do that, especially when you have the freedom that, say, players in the NBA don't have right now. And I think, that temptation's going to hit and cases will keep popping up unless we see a major change in policy.
Yeah, more to expand that. I actually a lot of people were kind of saying, well, why did Derek Jeter say this kind of comment? Maybe it looked a little bit arrogant, a little bit insensitive to his team. But knowing Derek Jeter, he's always about kind of the best for the MLB. He's just a great model of just, bringing the best to the game. And that's also just interesting too in its own right, just the fact that you're not having this in a bubble. So like I've advocated on the show before how I thought, they could have easily put this whole restart in Southern California because there's a lot of stadiums there. With UCLA, with the 3 MLB teams, with USC, you could have had a bubble format there. So the problem I see now is that it's like the NFL's having the same thing. They're going to try to do this market bubble. And the problem with it is, the travel also, there's a bigger case of COVID, right? So let's say you're going from Los Angeles Dodgers are going to play, down in Miami, right? Like that's just like you have a bigger chance for COVID, but you keep in the bubble. It's kind of a tough situation. And I'm not blaming the commissioner for this at all. Like he was trying to do what is going to make the league the most money and be able to have the games happen. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for me, I personally I see an unlikely finish to the season. And I hate to say that for baseball fans, but it's just, if you already have 2 teams with this problem, what's to say that other players are not going to say, oh, I'm going to go out to clubs too? Because you even see the NBA, Lou Williams went out to a nightclub. It's just hard as an athlete, as a professional athlete, you're used to a certain lifestyle that people just don't understand that that's what you're used to, right? And that kind of stuff. But transition to another thing, Joe Kelly got suspended 8 games. I think it was a pretty hilarious situation that he got suspended 8 games. To be honest, I watched the situation. I found it pretty funny. And I want to get your reaction to if you think that was too harsh of a suspension. And yeah, because like a lot of people are not too happy about the 8 games at all.
Yeah, I think it is a little harsh by the league. I get why it's 8 games, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But to think that, he only got 6 games in 2018 for, beaming that Yankees player and starting in a literal brawl. Whereas this was more just kind of a bench clearing altercation, no fighting. And I mean, 8 games is in a 60-game season. That's 13% of the season. That's a hefty suspension. I mean, 162 game season, I think 13% would be like 20 something games. You don't see suspensions like that
It'd be
for,
22.
yeah, 22 games. I mean, yeah, you don't see suspensions like that for anything besides PED use in the MLB. And to think that I mean, that's pretty hefty, especially for a guy that's as important to a team as Joe Kelly can be. But I get it at the same time. I think what the MLB is really trying to avoid is, especially with what happened with the Marlins last week, is having situations where you can see a mass spreading of COVID. And I think a bench clearing altercation is a prime way of, spreading the like that's as risky as I think it can get in the game of baseball for COVID to spread from one team to another team. And I think the MLB really wanted to, make an example of that, make an example of Joe Kelly as the aggressor in that situation, and as the initiator of that altercation. To say, we won't allow this at all this year. Like, we understand that, yeah, sure, riots and brawls are part of the game of baseball and they happen. But we can't allow this to happen in the age of COVID, in the age of the pandemic. Which is why I think they dropped the hammer a little more on Joe Kelly. That and the history of riots and altercations going back to 2018, and I think even earlier in that in his career.
Yeah. Also, I actually think that again he should have just been suspended. I probably would have said 5 games, just because of his history. I think you need to kind of teach him a little bit of a lesson in terms of just how he needs to act as a pitcher, act as kind of a professional, because he's a very good relief pitcher and he's big to the Dodgers. What the Dodgers can do when he has his head on straight, but a lot of times he doesn't, and he gets a little bit caught up in stuff. But the problem also, the reason why I think a lot of players are upset, it's because it's involved with the Astros, and they didn't like the MLB's response to the Astros. Like, I mean, you probably know all this stuff, but you know how like the most steep thing they got was their GM getting fired, and he was suspended, but then they fired him,
Mm-hmm.
and then getting like a $5 million fine. But that was kind of all they saw. They were kind of like, why aren't they banned from this kind of stuff or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting in its own right, because that's really, I think, where the players are really angry with, is because just the fact that the Astros themselves, they feel like, and maybe it's unfair to point this out, and maybe like it's not true, but the players feel like the Astros are protected by the league
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, because the Astros have been good for so many years because of their cheating scandal, and also they had good players. Like I'll say that they had good players. Their team is definitely good enough to win, the World Series, but now players are gonna say, well, they won because of the cheating scandal. Now the MLB's protecting them. I wanted your thoughts on that too. Like, do you think that's fair for them to criticize that, and that's why you think they're upset also about this Joe Kelly situation?
I mean, I do think it's fair to criticize the Astros, and I think this was a long time coming. Any riot with the Astros, especially for the Los Angeles Dodgers, who got kind of shafted from a World Series ring by the cheating scandal. And it's pretty apparent if you look at the film, if you look at the data in terms of what the Astros batting average was at home when they had the camera system in place in the World Series versus what it was away. I mean, I think Clayton Kershaw had an ERA around 7 in the World Series back in 2017 when the Astros won, and like at the Astros stadium, but at home, I think it was, more normal for him, somewhere around 2. Um, and I think there's a lot of good reason for the Dodgers to be upset by that. And I think it was, kind of inevitable that there would be some sort of altercation between, especially these two teams. You know, and I think a lot of players were frustrated by how the league handled it and wanted more action taken against the Astros, and the fact that more action wasn't taken, I think the players felt the need to take that into their own hands, and that's been something that players have been outspoken about for a long time. I mean, I think Alex Wood went on a pretty lengthy Twitter rant, like around the time that the investigations were happening, that if the MLB didn't drop the hammer a little more, that he or someone else would, you know, take matters into their own hands and you know, target Astros players. You know, and I think it's something that the league is always like pretty cautious about, or cautionary about, I should say. You know, I mean, I think it's pretty dangerous when you got a guy like Joe Kelly throwing upper 90s, you know, at a guy's head. You know, and I think the MLB's first responsibility is and always will be to protect the players. You know, and it's hard to do that when, you know, you got guys taking matters into their own hands.
Yeah, I think this is the problem. Because I saw, the YouTube video, I watched ESPN, and there are people, just people I think that don't quite understand the situation, saying how, you know, this commissioner is the worst in sports and everything like that. And I'm kind of saying to myself, you can't really go there, because you have to understand what they're trying to get done. Yeah, maybe the suspension was a little too harsh, but Joe Kelly's had a history of this. And also, they don't want players taking matters, like you just said, taking matters into their own hands. What the Astros did, no one is saying is right. It was completely wrong. Everyone gets that. But then you're not looking any better as a professional if you take matters into your own hands and you target Astros players, because the Astros cheated and everyone gets that. But they weren't, trying to, throw baseballs at your head, especially because these guys are so good. You're throwing 95-mile-per-hour pitches at someone's head. Like, the helmet's only going to do so much. And also, that guy could, there could be a potential worse than like a concussion there, right? Internal bleeding, you don't know, right?
If you like that clip, like and subscribe to hear more from Shred Takes podcast show, and be in touch for more stuff coming up weekly.